560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Trump is not too pleased with Putin. So goes the reporting from Kirsten Welker, who said that she got a call from POTUS about this. Not happy with Putin bringing up the credibility of Zelensky's leadership, talking about potentially regime change in Ukraine. As well, unmentioned by Welker, but I'm sure it didn't make him happy either. Putin suggesting that other countries should be brought in to help facilitate the peace process, including our good friends China and North Korea. Right.
Yeah, that's going to happen.
Here's Welker's reporting on her conversation with Trump, quoting him.
Just hours ago, President Trump called me to tell me he is, quote, pissed off with Russia's President Putin and threatened to impose secondary tariffs on Russia's oil. Quote, if Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if I think it was Russia's fault, I am going to put secondary tariffs on all oil coming out of Russia. Mr. Trump said 25% tariffs on Russian oil could happen any moment and told me he plans to speak with President Putin this week. The president told me, quote, I was very angry, pissed off when Putin started getting into Zelensky's credibility and started talking about new leadership in Ukraine.
For more on this and other topics, including the ongoing fallout from last week's signal contretemps, Lieutenant Colonel, retired, Tony Shaffer joins us, president at Project Sentinel and London Center for Policy Research, author of Operation Dark Heart, Spycraft and Special Ops on the Front Lines of Afghanistan and the Path to Victory. Colonel Shaffer, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning. Always great to be with you.
Good to have you. Trump not happy with Putin and threatening, as you heard, secondary tariffs on Russian oil. What's your reaction to the approach that Trump has taken with both sides in this efforting of peace in Eastern Europe?
He's been very clear on what he's trying to achieve, and he's been trying to use the tools available to achieve it. Now, the problem is this. There are, as we speak, 8 points on the ground in Ukraine where there's ground conflict. That is to say, the two sides are in combat. All 8 locations, this is from the 4 oblasts to the Kursk area, the Russians are winning. So the Russians are kind of like, we're negotiating, but we're not all that worried about having to end this too soon because they're actually gaining territory. And the other thing to remember, Putin has his own hardliners who don't want to stop the war. So this is, both men are trying to deal with folks within their own country who have views that may be different than the two men. So that's the current kind of Russian side of it. Zelensky has said he doesn't want to give up fighting because they think somehow the French and British are going to be like miracle workers and bring troops out of into magical existence, since they don't exist right now in either the French or British armies, and we're going to underwrite that, which we're not going to do. So there's like 2 philosophies passing in the night. The Europeans want to continue the war and fund it, and Zelensky believes it, which I don't know why he would. And then you got the Russians saying, yeah, we're taking our time, we're in no rush. So that's where it's at, and Trump's in the middle. And it's something that Trump is trying everything he can to use the sanction threat to essentially cease all new arms support to Ukraine. Right now, what's going was already in the pipeline under the Biden administration. There's nothing more. So if things continue as they are, and I hope it's not true, we're going to see within 2 months a victory by Russia over Ukraine if all things remain the same.
Well, if you know that, then Putin certainly does, and so this is the slow walking. Let's bring some more parties to the table and have expand the conversation, all this other silliness. So, of course, Trump's team realizes that, too. The secondary sanctions on oil, on Russian oil, is that enough of a potential cost to impose on Russia to get Putin to the table?
No, because ultimately that will help Putin and hurt the Europeans even more, because part of what's happened, and this has been reported, it's accurate, is that the Europeans are spending more money on Putin, on the black market Putin oil, than they do on support for Ukraine. So it's kind of like the Europeans cannot live without the gas and oil from Russia. They just can't. So you do the sanction, you hurt the Europeans. So it's, I think, a lot of bluster. And I feel President Trump's pain. I'm with him on this. I'm just telling y'all, I know how these things work, and I think it's a great threat, but I just don't know if it'll have that great an effect to get Putin. I think the biggest thing is going to be actually the carrot. If you tell Putin, look, we're going to help open the markets, get you back into the global exchange system called SWIFT, we're going to do some things to sweeten the deal, I think that would have a lot more effect than sanctions at this point.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel, what do you think victory looks like for Putin?
Yeah, great question. So it is full control of the 4 oblasts, the Crimea, the area where they've invaded, and the repulsion of all Ukrainian forces out of Kursk. Essentially, they are in the disputed 4 oblasts, the 4 territories. They are 70 to 75% there, and they're making progress. So that's like, a no-brainer. Kursk, the Kursk salient, where the Ukrainians went into Russia, they're about to get kicked out. They've lost 80% of the land that they initially seized. And I don't believe that Putin is seeking more territory at this point. I think they really do want to just consolidate that. So that would be victory in what they consider their special military operation. Would there be more? Well, the answer is potentially, and that is Odessa. Odessa is something they said they want, and this is why I think the peace deal is more preferable to a Russian victory. Because again, I'm not a Putin fan. I fought Putin and the Russians during the Cold War, so I'm no fan. I'm simply trying to call balls and strikes here. But a victory would look like full control of 4 disputed areas, plus the removal of Ukrainian forces from Russia, and with essentially an imposed peace under Russian terms within the rest of the country. I don't think he wants the rest of Ukraine.
But he wants Zelensky gone so he can put a puppet in.
Absolutely. Well, that's true. I don't disagree on that.
And that would be a bad look. It'd be difficult to swallow that from a PR perspective.
Yeah, and this is one of the things too, is that Russia has had an inherent paranoia because of who they are. And I always try to remind people, it's like, look, I am not pro-Russian, but I do understand that over the 1,000-year history of the Russian nation in some form, there's been a number of things which have happened relating to France invading, Germans invading, and so they inherently want a buffer state, and that's where Ukraine, they want to be that buffer state. I'm not saying I'm pro-Putin. I'm just saying this is what they see as necessary for their continued national security.
I recognize this is a bit of a trick bag for Trump, but just in terms of the stick side of the equation, since, Putin is a thug, and thugs don't necessarily always respond positively to niceties. They respond more to, being beat about the head and neck area. And what if he reversed course and provided more weapons to Ukraine to sustain the fight?
It would be doubling down on what already didn't work. I've said this, I may have even said it with you guys. Within the first few months of the war, I said, unless there's an outside military force, troops, that are equal to a peer state the size of Russia, they'll never win. The population numbers just don't add up. This has always been a numbers game, never going to happen. So unless there's a decision to bring in NATO to make this a full World War III, it's never going to happen. Because the Russians are just kind of slow burning this right now. They're bringing in about 30,000 troops a month. Ukraine's bringing in about 20. the numbers are never going to add up if we simply use the Ukrainians as a proxy. And so the choice then becomes, do you get on an escalatory conflict graph where we continue to expand and we eventually go to war? Is it worth it or not? And that's where I think there'd have to be a debate about it.
Well, right. And so let me just extend this possibility. And I know it presents all kinds of complications, and some of which you just described. But, I mean, we can, sending the message to Putin, we can buy time, too. I mean, we can slow walk this, too. So we'll provide weapons to Ukraine for them to continue to impose casualties on your side, hold you at bay for now. And in the meantime, we're going to cut off your access to that black market oil. And if you don't think we can, and we can do it in this amount of time. And we're going to get with the Europeans. And if we need to, we'll publicly call them out again. And there are other things we can do to the Europeans, as you well know. Including on tariffs. I'm just getting started. And we're going to replace that oil and gas that they're getting from you via the black market with American oil and gas. We're going to enrich ourselves in the process, and I'm happy to do that. So then you will start to feel the economic pain of those secondary sanctions I mentioned.
I understand what you're saying. I still think the time it would take to actually implement that, you'd have another probably 200,000 Ukrainians die during that process. And I think that's what everybody recognizes we want to end. Right now, as has been said by Victoria Nuland and others, Ukrainians are essentially fighting our fight. It's like, okay, yeah, I don't know if it's our fight. I understand what everybody's saying. It's just I'm a warrior from the Cold War. I'm a Reagan guy. And Reagan was able to use the spectrum of mechanisms to essentially hobble Russia without having to cause a whole generation of Ukrainians or some other nation to die. So I think there's ways we can do this. I think we just need to stop the fighting. I think if we so choose to fight the Russians, then there's other ways to do it. My judgment is, though, and I was talking to Roger Stone about this last night, who advised Nixon and Reagan both. My view is we need to essentially find a way to get China, play the Russia card against China, because I think our bigger threat is China at this point. And the Russia-China issue is something that we have to be concerned about.
When you say, sorry to interrupt, but when you say play the Russia card against China to get them to engage with Putin, what does that mean? What's the Russia card vis-a-vis them, according to you?
Good question. So when China looks at Russia, they see food. They see a resource they're going to consume eventually. The Chinese have said, and even Mark Milley, when I was on the transition team, said this in one of his lucid moments, that all Chinese military doctrine says that they're going to first go for dominance of the Pacific Rim and then global hegemony. They're going to basically take our place. That's their stated goal. And Russia knows this too. But Russia knows that they can't stop us and they can't stop the Chinese. So they're kind of caught in the middle. In 1972, Nixon went to China to basically get China to come over and start helping us during the Cold War. Right now, I'm proposing, I think people have talked about it the other way around, using Russia against China, because right now they've had an alliance, and that is something that I think we can break. There is no inherent love between the Chinese and Russians. Even before they were communists, they've always had a very long border, and they've never gotten along. So I think we really need to start looking at how we can work on regarding other issues. The other issue is Iran. Russia said they're going to help us with Iran. Iran actually acknowledged that they're willing to talk to us through a third party. That's probably going to be Russia. So as much as it pains me, I just don't think that expanding the war against Russia via Ukraine will do anything to solve the potential of us using Russia for some of these other larger geopolitical issues.
I want to get your reaction to the fallout and, of course, the customary calls from the left for Pete Hegseth and Mike Walsh to resign because they're all about accountability, don't you know? Play a clip from David Brooks, and I'm playing this from PBS because I learned last week that PBS is a unbiased, nonpartisan news source. So that's I want to go to unbiased, nonpartisan news sources like PBS and NPR. Here's David Brooks on Signal.
Yeah, I've spiraled. When I first saw Jeff's story, I just thought mind-boggling incompetence, like something I've never seen before. And it just seemed like, and I've been saying for weeks, the Democrats should talk about nothing but Trump incompetence, incompetence, incompetence. But then it got uglier. I was at the gym, believe it or not, when I watched Pete Hegseth come off an airplane and make his first comment, attacking Jeff. But just mostly it was an aggressive form of bald-faced lying that tells you a lot about a guy. It was obvious they were caught with a screw-up. A normal human being, I really think 99% of human beings said, we messed up, we're going to fix this, we messed up. But not the Trump administration. They went on a vicious attack of character assassination, of ad hominem, of all the ugliest things it's possible to dredge up, and that was their universal instinct. And so I found it incredibly ugly as the story went on.
Ruth, what about that? I mean, it's characteristic of a White House that never admits.
Then Ruth Marcus, columnist emeritus for the Washington Post, went on to say this is a scary moment, and I'm not sure we can put the international order back after all the damage that's been done by a signal chat. Anyway, Colonel Shaffer, your response to what transpired last week and then the histrionics of the left as nicely encapsulated by David Brooks.
Yeah, well put. So to begin with, there was a company called Carter Heavy Equipment in Manassas, Virginia, that were getting carbon copies of every Hillary Clinton illegal email to include highly classified information. I got that verified in person by a DOD DIA IG who reported that to the FBI, and it got ignored. So the Chinese were getting the Chinese cover company, the Chinese intelligence service, were getting copies of Hillary's email in real time. Then you have the Afghanistan debacle, just kind of doing a couple things together. Lord Austin lost 13 Americans, completely failed withdrawal from Afghanistan. So we're supposed to ignore all that and say the signal thing where John Radcliffe, the director of CIA, said the signal app was on government-issued phones and it was approved. Now, it then becomes how did Goldberg get on the thing? Well, I think that's still worth investigating. That's going to be something that people need to look at. And full disclosure, I know Mike Waltz. I know Pete Hegseth. Pete and I are friends. And I think this is all something. Something's going on to get rid of Pete Hegseth, because all the focus seems to be on Pete, and Pete wasn't the guy who put the chat group together. Just saying. It's like, okay, you're all going after Pete, but he's not the guy who did it. Okay. And they're saying, it's classified information. It's like, look, I've been on in operations. I've worked operations at the level we're talking, and I've worked operations at the execution level where I'm out doing something. The information shared, while technically significant, was not classified. It didn't specifically give the target locations, time on target of aircraft, time on target of special ops. None of that. War plans are very specific. They're outlined. They look a certain way. There's a 5-paragraph operations order. That wasn't it. So the way they're doing this, to me, is just reflective of who they are, trying to literally go after people they don't like, don't want to continue, as if the international order is going to fall, because we essentially had a leadership group texting the last bit of information to coordinate the strike. That didn't compromise anything. So, and then the Goldberg thing being in the chat, that needs to be examined. Everything else is just kind of wasted discussion points.
Yeah, there's a lot of conflating, too, of terminology. It went from classified to war plans to attack plans, and they probably have very specific meanings to you, but in the to the layman, they really don't. And so this is what the left uses to sort of bob and weave to continue their line of attack.
And by the way, just wanted to note on that, Pete Hegseth has something called Original Classification Authority. And I know this is going to blow the left's mind, but he can classify, declassify anything he wants. He has that authority. Mm-hmm. So him simply saying, because it was real time and nobody could do anything to stop it, I declassified it. It was declassified. He has that authority. And no one has even brought that up.
Another matter, too, here, I mean, to your point about, and I made this point last week, that Radcliffe, I use Signal, it's on government-issued app and government-issued phones and so forth. I mean, the app did not fail. There was a human error that included Jeffrey Goldberg.
Right. That's correct.
Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, retired president, Project Sentinel and London Center for Policy Research, author of Operation Dark Heart, Spycraft and Special Ops on the Front Lines of Afghanistan and the Path to Victory. Colonel Shaffer, thank you as always. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I always enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
It's important to have a heating and cooling company you know you can depend on. That company is the original Arlington Heights Heating and Cooling. They aren't one of those massive companies with new